Chapter 41. From Cape Horn to the Amazon. How I got onto the platform I'm unable to say. Perhaps the Canadian transferred me there. But I could breathe. I could inhale the life-giving sea air. Next to me, my two companions were getting tipsy on the fresh oxygen particles. Poor souls who have suffered from long starvation mustn't pounce heedlessly on the first food given them. We, on the other hand, didn't have to practice such moderation. We could suck the atoms from the air by the lungful, and it was the breeze itself, that poured into us this luxurious intoxication. Ah, Conseil was putting in. What fine oxygen! Let Master have no fears about breathing. There's enough for everyone. As for Ned Land, he didn't say a word, but his wide-open jaws would have scared off a shark. And what powerful inhalations! The Canadian drew like a furnace going full blast. Our strength returned promptly, and when I looked around, I saw that we were alone on the platform. No crewmen, not even Captain Nemo. Those strange seamen on the Nautilus were content with the oxygen circulating inside. Not one of them had come up to enjoy the open air. The first words I pronounced were words of appreciation and gratitude to my two companions. Ned and Conseil had kept me alive during the final hours of our long death throes, but no expression of thanks could repay them fully for such devotion. "Good Lord, Professor," Ned Land answered me, "don't mention it." What did we do that's so praiseworthy? Not a thing. It was a question of simple arithmetic. Your life is worth more than ours, so we had to save it. "No, Ned," I replied, "it isn't worth more. Nobody could be better than a kind and generous man like yourself." All right, the Canadian repeated in embarrassment. "And you, my gallant Conseil, you suffered a great deal." "Not too much, to be candid with Master. I was lacking a few throatfuls of air, but I would have gotten by. Besides, when I saw Master fainting, it left me without the slightest desire to breathe. It took my breath away, in a manner of." Confounded by this lapse into banality, Conseil left his sentence hanging. "My friends," I replied, very moved, "we're bound to each other forever, and I'm deeply indebted to you, which I'll take advantage of," the Canadian shot back. Conseil put in. "Yes," Ned Land went on. "You can repay your debt by coming with me when I leave this infernal Nautilus." "By the way," Conseil said, "are we going in a favorable direction?" "Yes," I replied, "because we're going in the direction of the sun, and here the sun is due north." "Sure," Ned Land went on. "But it remains to be seen whether we'll make for the Atlantic or the Pacific. In other words, whether we'll end up in well-traveled or deserted seas." I had no reply to this, and I feared that Captain Nemo wouldn't take us homeward, but rather into that huge ocean washing the shores of both Asia and America. In this way he would complete his underwater tour of the world, going back to those seas where the Nautilus enjoyed the greatest freedom. But if we returned to the Pacific, far from every populated shore, what would happen to Ned Land's plans? We would soon settle this important point. The Nautilus traveled swiftly. Soon we had cleared the Antarctic Circle plus the promontory of Cape Horn. We were abreast of the tip of South America by March 31 at 7 o'clock in the evening. By then all our past sufferings were forgotten. The memory of that imprisonment under the ice faded from our minds. We had thoughts only of the future. Captain Nemo no longer appeared, neither in the lounge nor on the platform. The positions reported each day on the world map were put there by the chief officer, and they enabled me to determine the Nautilus's exact heading. Now then, that evening it became obvious, much to my satisfaction, that we were returning north by the Atlantic route. I shared the results of my observations with the Canadian and Conseil. "That's good news," the Canadian replied. "But where's the Nautilus going?" "I'm unable to say, Ned. After the South Pole, does our captain want to tackle the North Pole, then go back to the Pacific by the notorious Northwest Passage?" "I wouldn't double dare him," Conseil replied. "Oh well," the Canadian said, "we'll give him the slip long before then. In any event," Conseil added, "he's a Superman, that Captain Nemo, and we'll never regret having known him." "Especially once we've left him," Ned Land shot back. The next day, April 1, when the Nautilus rose to the surface of the waves a few minutes before noon, we raised land to the west. It was Tierra del Fuego, the land of fire, a name given it by early navigators after they saw numerous curls of smoke rising from the natives' huts. This land of fire forms a huge cluster of islands over 30 leagues long and 80 leagues wide, extending between latitude 53 degrees and 56 degrees south, and between longitude 67 degrees 50 and 77 degrees 15 west. Its coastline looked flat, but high mountains rose in the distance. I even thought I glimpsed Mt. Sarmiento, whose elevation is 2,070 meters above sea level, a pyramid-shaped block of shale with a very sharp summit, which, depending on whether it's clear or veiled in vapor, predicts fair weather or foul, as Ned Land told me. A first-class barometer, my friend. Yes, sir, a natural barometer that didn't let me down when I navigated the narrows of the Strait of Magellan. Just then its peak appeared before us, standing out distinctly against the background of the skies. This forecast fair weather, and so it proved. Going back under the waters, the Nautilus drew near the coast, cruising along it for only a few miles. Through the lounge windows I could see long creepers and gigantic fucus plants, bulb-bearing seaweed of which the open sea at the pole had revealed a few specimens. With their smooth, viscous filaments, they measured as much as 300 meters long. Genuine cables more than an inch thick and very tough. They're often used as mooring lines for ships. Another weed, known by the name Velp and boasting 4-foot leaves, was crammed into the coral concretions and carpeted the ocean floor. It served as both nest and nourishment for myriads of crustaceans and mollusks, for crabs and cuttlefish. Here seals and otters could indulge in a sumptuous meal, mixing meat from fish with vegetables from the sea, like the English with their Irish stews. The Nautilus passed over these lush, luxuriant depths with tremendous speed. Near evening it approached the Falkland Islands, whose rugged summits I recognized the next day. The sea was of moderate depth, so not without good reason, I assumed that these two islands, plus the many islets surrounding them, used to be part of the Magellan coastline. The Falkland Islands were probably discovered by the famous navigator John Davis, who gave them the name Davis Southern Islands. Later Sir Richard Hawkins called them the Maidenland, after the Blessed Virgin. Subsequently, at the beginning of the 18th century, they were named the Malouines by fishermen from St. Malo in Brittany, then finally dubbed the Falklands by the English, to whom they belong today. In these waterways our nets brought up fine samples of algae, in particular certain fucus plants whose roots were laden with the world's best mussels. Geese and duck alighted by the dozens on the platform and soon took their places in the ship's pantry. As for fish, I specifically observed some bony fish belonging to the goby genus, especially some gudgeon 2 decimeters long, sprinkled with whitish and yellow spots. I likewise marveled at the numerous medusas, including the most beautiful of their breed, the compass jellyfish, unique to the Falkland Seas. Some of these jellyfish were shaped like very smooth, semispheric parasols with russet stripes and fringes of 12 neat festoons. Others looked like upside-down baskets from which wide leaves and long red twigs were gracefully trailing. They swam with quiverings of their 4 leaf-like arms, letting the opulent tresses of their tentacles dangle in the drift. I wanted to preserve a few specimens of these delicate zoophytes, but they were merely clouds, shadows, illusions, melting and evaporating outside their native element. When the last tips of the Falkland Islands had disappeared below the horizon, the Nautilus submerged to a depth between 20 and 25 meters and went along the South American coast. Captain Nemo didn't put in an appearance. We didn't leave these Patagonian waterways until April 3, sometimes cruising under the ocean, sometimes on its surface. The Nautilus passed the wide estuary formed by the mouth of the Rio de la Plata, and on April 4 we lay abreast of Uruguay, albeit 50 miles out. Keeping to its northerly heading, it followed the long windings of South America. By then we had fared 16,000 leagues since coming on board in the seas of Japan. Near 11 o'clock in the morning, we cut the Tropic of Capricorn on the 37th meridian, passing well out from Cape Frio. Much to Ned Land's displeasure, Captain Nemo had no liking for the neighborhood of Brazil's populous shores, because he shot by with dizzying speed. Not even the swiftest fish or birds could keep up with us, and the natural curiosities in these seas completely eluded our observation. This speed was maintained for several days, and on the evening of April 9, we raised South America's easternmost tip, Cape São Roque. But then the Nautilus veered away again and went looking for the lowest depths of an underwater valley gouged between this cape and Sierra Leone on the coast of Africa. Abreast of the West Indies, this valley forks into two arms, and to the north it ends in an enormous depression 9,000 meters deep. From this locality to the Lesser Antilles, the ocean's geologic profile features a steeply cut cliff 6 kilometers high, and abreast of the Cape Verde Islands, there's another wall just as imposing. Together these two barricades confine the whole submerged continent of Atlantis. The floor of this immense valley is made picturesque by mountains that furnish these underwater depths with scenic views. This description is based mostly on certain hand-drawn charts kept in the Nautilus's library, charts obviously rendered by Captain Nemo himself from his own personal observations. For 2 days, we visited these deep and deserted waters by means of our slanting fins. The Nautilus would do long, diagonal dives that took us to every level. But on April 11 it rose suddenly, and the shore reappeared at the mouth of the Amazon River, a huge estuary whose outflow is so considerable, it desalts the sea over an area of several leagues. We cut the equator. 20 miles to the west lay Guyana, French territory where we could easily have taken refuge. But the wind was blowing a strong gust, and the furious billows would not allow us to face them in a mere skiff. No doubt Ned Land understood this, because he said nothing to me. For my part, I made no allusion to his escape plans because I didn't want to push him into an attempt that was certain to misfire. I was readily compensated for this delay by fascinating research. During those 2 days of April 11-12, the Nautilus didn't leave the surface of the sea, and its trawl brought up a simply miraculous catch of zoophytes, fish, and reptiles. Some zoophytes were dredged up by the chain of our trawl. Most were lovely sea anemone belonging to the family Actinidia, including among other species, the Fictalis proxta, native to this part of the ocean, a small cylindrical trunk adorned with vertical lines, mottled with red spots, and crowned by a wondrous blossoming of tentacles. As for mollusks, they consisted of exhibits I had already observed: turret snails, olive shells of the tent olive species with neatly intersecting lines and russet spots standing out sharply against a flesh-colored background, fanciful spider conchs that looked like petrified scorpions, transparent glass snails, argonauts, some highly edible cuttlefish, and certain species of squid that the naturalists of antiquity classified with the flying fish, which are used chiefly as bait for catching cod. As for the fish in these waterways, I noted various species that I hadn't yet had the opportunity to study. Among cartilaginous fish, some brook lamprey, a type of eel 15 inches long, head greenish, fins violet, back bluish-gray, belly a silvery brown strewn with bright spots, iris of the eye encircled in gold, unusual animals that the Amazon's current must have swept out to sea because their natural habitat is fresh water. Stingrays, the snout pointed, the tail long, slender, and armed with an extensive jagged sting. Small 1-meter sharks with gray and whitish hides, their teeth arranged in several backward-curving rows, fish commonly known by the name carpet shark. Batfish, a sort of reddish isosceles triangle 1/2 meter long, whose pectoral fins are attached by fleshy extensions that make these fish look like bats, although an appendage made of horn, located near the nostrils, earns them the nickname of sea unicorns. Lastly, a couple species of triggerfish, the cucuyo whose stippled flanks glitter with a sparkling gold color, and the bright purple leather jacket whose hues glisten like a pigeon's throat. I'll finish up this catalog, a little dry but quite accurate, with the series of bony fish I observed. Eels belonging to the genus Apteronotus whose snow-white snout is very blunt, The body painted a handsome black and armed with a very long, slender, fleshy whip. Long sardines from the genus Odontognathus, like 3-decimeter pike, shining with a bright silver glow. Garanian mackerel furnished with 2 anal fins. Black-tinted rudderfish that you catch by using torches. Fish measuring 2 meters and boasting white, firm, plump meat that, when fresh, tastes like eel when dried like smoked salmon. Semired wrasse sporting scales only at the bases of their dorsal and anal fins. Grunts on which gold and silver mingle their luster with that of ruby and topaz. Yellow-tailed gilthead whose flesh is extremely dainty and whose phosphorescent properties give them away in the midst of the waters. Porgies tinted orange with slender tongues. Croakers with gold caudal fins. Black surgeonfish. 4-eyed fish from Suriname, etc. This, etc., won't keep me from mentioning one more fish that Conseil, with good reason, will long remember. One of our nets had hauled up a type of very flat ray that weighed some 20 kilograms. With its tail cut off, it would have formed a perfect disc. It was white underneath and reddish on top, with big round spots of deep blue encircled in black, its hide quite smooth and ending in a double-lobed fin. Laid out on the platform, it kept struggling with convulsive movements, trying to turn over, making such efforts that its final lunge was about to flip it into the sea. But Conseil, being very possessive of his fish, rushed at it, and before I could stop him, he seized it with both hands. Instantly there he was, thrown on his back, legs in the air, his body half paralyzed and yelling, "Oh, sir. Will you help me?" For once in his life, the poor lad didn't address me in the third person. The Canadian and I sat him up. We massaged his contracted arms, and when he regained his 5 senses, that eternal classifier mumbled in a broken voice, "Class of cartilaginous fish, order Chondropterygia with fixed gills, suborder Cetacea, family Rogioforma, genus electric ray." "Yes, my friend," I answered. "It was an electric ray that put you in this deplorable state." "Oh, master can trust me on this," Conseil shot back. "I'll be revenged on that animal. How? I'll eat it." Which he did that same evening, but strictly as retaliation, because, frankly, it tasted like leather. Poor Conseil had assaulted an electric ray of the most dangerous species, the cumana. Living in a conducting medium such as water, this bizarre animal can electrocute other fish from several meters away. So great is the power of its electric organ, an organ whose 2 chief surfaces measure at least 27 square feet. During the course of the next day, April 12, the Nautilus drew near the coast of Dutch Guiana, by the mouth of the Maroni River. There several groups of sea cows were living in family units. These were manatees, which belonged to the order Sirenia, like the dugong and stellar sea cow. Harmless and unaggressive, these fine animals were 6 to 7 meters long and must have weighed at least 4,000 kilograms each. I told Ned Land and Conseil that farseeing nature had given these mammals a major role to play. In essence, manatees, like seals, are designed to graze the underwater prairies, destroying the clusters of weeds that obstruct the mouths of tropical rivers. And do you know, I added, what happened since man has almost completely wiped out these beneficial races? Rotting weeds have poisoned the air, and this poisoned air causes the yellow fever that devastates these wonderful countries. This toxic vegetation has increased beneath the seas of the torrid zone, so the disease spreads unchecked from the mouth of the Rio de la Plata to Florida. And if Professor Towsonal is correct, this plague is nothing compared to the scourge that will strike our descendants once the seas are depopulated of whales and seals. By then, crowded with jellyfish, squid, and other devilfish, the oceans will have become huge centers of infection because their waves will no longer possess these huge stomachs that God has entrusted with scouring the surface of the sea. Meanwhile, without scorning these theories, the Nautilus's crew captured 6 manatees. In essence, it was an issue of stocking the larder with excellent red meat, even better than beef or veal. Their hunting was not a fascinating sport. The manatees let themselves be struck down without offering any resistance. Several thousand kilos of meat were hauled below to be dried and stored. The same day, an odd fishing practice further increased the Nautilus's stores, so full of game were these seas. Our trawl brought up in its meshes a number of fish whose heads were topped by little oval slabs with fleshy edges. These were suckerfish from the third family of the Subracean Malacopterygii. These flat discs on their heads consist of crosswise plates of movable cartilage, between which the animals can create a vacuum, enabling them to stick to objects like suction cups. The remeras I had observed in the Mediterranean were related to this species. But the creature at issue here was an Echinase osteochara, unique to this sea. Right after catching them, our seamen dropped them in buckets of water. Its fishing finished, the Nautilus drew nearer to the coast. In this locality, a number of sea turtles were sleeping on the surface of the waves. It would have been difficult to capture these valuable reptiles, because they wake up at the slightest sound, and their solid carapaces are harpoon-proof. But our suckerfish would effect their capture with extraordinary certainty and precision. In truth, this animal is a living fishhook, promising wealth and happiness to the greenest fishermen in the business. The Nautilus's men attached to each fish's tail a ring that was big enough not to hamper its movements, and to this ring a long rope whose other end was moored on board. Thrown into the sea, the suckerfish immediately began to play their roles, going and fastening themselves onto the breastplates of the turtles. Their tenacity was so great, they would rip apart rather than let go. They were hauled in, still sticking to the turtles that came aboard with them. In this way we caught several loggerheads, reptiles a meter wide and weighing 200 kilos. They're extremely valuable because of their carapaces, which are covered with big slabs of horn, thin, brown, transparent, with white and yellow markings. Besides, they were excellent from an edible viewpoint, with an exquisite flavor comparable to the green turtle. This fishing ended our stay in the waterways of the Amazon, and that evening the Nautilus took to the high seas once more. Chapter 42. The Devilfish. For some days the Nautilus kept veering away from the American coast. It obviously didn't want to frequent the waves of the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean Sea. Yet there was no shortage of water under its keel, since the average depth of these seas is 1,800 meters. But these waterways, strewn with islands and plowed by steamers, probably didn't agree with Captain Nemo. On April 16, we raised Martinique and Guadeloupe from a distance of about 30 miles. For one instant, I could see their lofty peaks. The Canadian was quite disheartened, having counted on putting his plans into execution in the Gulf, either by reaching shore or by pulling alongside one of the many boats plying a coastal trade from one island to another. An escape attempt would have been quite feasible, assuming Ned Land managed to seize the skiff without the captain's knowledge, but in mid-ocean it was unthinkable. The Canadian, Conseil, and I had a pretty long conversation on this subject. For 6 months we had been prisoners aboard the Nautilus. We had fared 17,000 leagues, and as Ned Land put it, there was no end in sight. So he made me a proposition I hadn't anticipated. We were to ask Captain Nemo this question straight out. Did the captain mean to keep us on board his vessel permanently? This measure was distasteful to me. To my mind, it would lead nowhere. We could hope for nothing from the Nautilus's commander but could depend only on ourselves. Besides, for some time now the man had been gloomier, more withdrawn, less sociable. He seemed to be avoiding me. I encountered him only at rare intervals. He used to take pleasure in explaining the underwater wonders to me. Now he left me to my research and no longer entered the lounge. What changes had come over him? From what cause? I had no reason to blame myself. Was our presence on board perhaps a burden to him? Even so, I cherished no hopes that the man would set us free, so I begged Ned to let me think about it before taking action. If this measure proved fruitless, it could arouse the captain's suspicions, make our circumstances even more arduous, and jeopardize the Canadian's plans. I might add that I could hardly use our state of health as an argument. Except for that grueling ordeal under the ice bank at the South Pole, we had never felt better, neither Ned, Conseil, nor I. The nutritious food, life-giving air, regular routine, and uniform temperature kept illness at bay. And for a man who didn't miss his past existence on land, for a Captain Nemo who was at home here, who went where he wished, who took paths mysterious to others if not himself in attaining his ends, I could understand such a life. But we ourselves hadn't severed all ties with humanity. For my part, I didn't want my new and unusual research to be buried with my bones. I had now earned the right to pen the definitive book on the sea, and sooner or later I wanted that book to see the light of day. There once more, through the panels opening into these Caribbean waters 10 meters below the surface of the waves, I found so many fascinating exhibits to describe in my daily notes. Among other zoophytes there were Portuguese men-of-war known by the name Physalia pelagica, like big, oblong bladders with a pearly sheen, spreading their membranes to the wind, letting their blue tentacles drift like silken threads, to the eye delightful jellyfish, to the touch actual nettles that ooze a corrosive liquid. Among the articulates there were annelid worms 1.5 meters long, furnished with a pink proboscis, equipped with 1,700 organs of locomotion, snaking through the waters, and as they went, throwing off every gleam in the solar spectrum. From the fish branch there were manta rays, enormous cartilaginous fish 10 feet long and weighing 600 pounds, their pectoral fin triangular, their midback slightly arched, their eyes attached to the edges of the face at the front of the head. They floated like wreckage from a ship, sometimes fastening onto our windows like opaque shutters. There were American triggerfish for which nature has ground only black and white pigments, feather-shaped gobies that were long and plump with yellow fins and jutting jaws, 16-decimeter mackerel with short, sharp teeth, covered with small scales, and related to the albacore species. Next came swarms of red mullet corseted in gold stripes from head to tail, their shining fins all a-quiver, genuine masterpieces of jewelry, formerly sacred to the goddess Diana, much in demand by rich Romans, and about which the old saying goes, "He who catches them doesn't eat them." Finally, adorned with emerald ribbons and dressed in velvet and silk, golden angelfish passed before our eyes like courtiers in the paintings of Veronese, spurred gilt-head stole by with their swift thoracic fins. Thread herring 15 inches long were wrapped in their phosphorescent glimmers. Gray mullet thrashed the sea with their big fleshy tails. Red salmon seemed to mow the waves with their slicing pectorals, and silver moonfish, worthy of their name, rose on the horizon of the waters like the whitish reflections of many moons. How many other marvelous new specimens I still could have observed if, little by little, the Nautilus hadn't settled to the lower strata. Its slanting fins drew it to depths of 2,000 and 3,500 meters. Their animal life was represented by nothing more than sea lilies, starfish, delightful crinoids with bell-shaped heads like little chalices on straight stems, topshell snails, blood-red tooth shells, and fissurella snails, a large species of coastal mollusk. By April 20, we had risen to an average level of 1,500 meters. The nearest land was the island group of the Bahamas, scattered like a batch of cobblestones over the surface of the water. Their high underwater cliffs reared up, straight walls made of craggy chunks arranged like big stone foundations, among which there gaped black caves so deep our electric rays couldn't light them to the far ends. These rocks were hung with huge weeds, immense sea-tangle gigantic fucus, a genuine trellis of water plants fit for a world of giants. In discussing these colossal plants, Conseil, Ned, and I were naturally led into mentioning the sea's gigantic animals. The former were obviously meant to feed the latter. However, through the windows of our almost motionless Nautilus, I could see nothing among these long filaments other than the chief articulates of the division Brachyura, long-legged spider crabs, violet crabs, and sponge crabs unique to the waters of the Caribbean. It was about 11 o'clock when Ned Land drew my attention to a fearsome commotion out in this huge seaweed. "Well," I said, "these are real devilfish caverns, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those monsters hereabouts." "What?" Conseil put in. "Squid, ordinary squid from the class Cephalopoda. No, I said, devilfish of large dimensions, but friend Land is no doubt mistaken because I don't see a thing. That's regrettable, Conseil answered. I'd like to come face to face with one of those devilfish I've heard so much about, which can drag ships down into the depths. Those beasts go by the name of crake. Fake is more like it, the Canadian replied sarcastically. Krakens, Conseil shot back, finishing his word without wincing at his companion's witticism. Nobody will ever make me believe, Ned Land said, that such animals exist. Why not, Conseil replied. We sincerely believed in Master's narwhal. We were wrong, Conseil. No doubt, but there are others with no doubts who believe to this day, probably Conseil. But as for me, I'm bound and determined not to accept the existence of any such monster till I've dissected it with my own 2 hands. Yet, Conseil asked me, doesn't Master believe in gigantic devilfish? Yikes. Who in Hades ever believed in them? The Canadian exclaimed. Many people, Ned, my friend, I said. No fishermen, scientists maybe. Pardon me, Ned. Fishermen and scientists. Why, I to whom you speak, Conseil said with the world's straightest face. I recall perfectly seeing a large boat dragged under the waves by the arms of a cephalopod. You saw that? The Canadian asked. Yes, Ned, with your own 2 eyes, with my own 2 eyes. Where, may I ask? In St. Malo, Conseil returned unflappably. In the harbor, Ned Land said sarcastically. No, in a church, Conseil replied. In a church, the Canadian exclaimed. Yes, Ned, my friend. It had a picture that portrayed the devilfish in question. Oh, good, Ned Land exclaimed with a burst of laughter. Mr. Conseil put one over on me. Actually, he's right, I said. I've heard about that picture. But the subject it portrays is taken from a legend, and you know how to rate legends in matters of natural history. Besides, when it's an issue of monsters, the human imagination always tends to run wild. People not only claim these devilfish could drag ships under, but a certain Olaus Magnus tells of a cephalopod a mile long that looked more like an island than an animal. There's also the story of how the Bishop of Trondheim set up an altar one day on an immense rock. After he finished saying Mass, this rock started moving and went back into the sea. The rock was a devilfish. And that's everything we know, the Canadian asked. No, I replied. Another bishop, Pontoppidan of Bergen, also tells of a devilfish so large a whole cavalry regiment could maneuver on it. They sure did go on, those old-time bishops, Ned Land said. Finally, the naturalists of antiquity mention some monsters with mouths as big as a gulf, which were too huge to get through the Strait of Gibraltar. Good work, men, the Canadian put in. But in all these stories, is there any truth? Conseil asked. None at all, my friends, at least in those that go beyond the bounds of credibility and fly off into fable or legend. Yet for the imaginings of these storytellers there had to be, if not a cause, at least an excuse. It can't be denied that some species of squid and other devilfish are quite large, though still smaller than cetaceans. Aristotle put the dimensions of one squid at 5 cubits, or 3.1 meters. Our fishermen frequently see specimens over 1.8 meters long. The museums in Trieste and Montpellier have preserved some devilfish carcasses measuring 2 meters. Besides, according to the calculations of naturalists, one of these animals only 6 feet long would have tentacles as long as 27, which is enough to make a fearsome monster. Does anybody fish for 'em nowadays? The Canadian asked. If they don't fish for them, sailors at least sight them. A friend of mine, Captain Paul Bowes of Le Havre, has often sworn to me that he encountered one of these monsters of colossal size in the seas of the East Indies. But the most astonishing event, which proves that these gigantic animals undeniably exist, took place a few years ago in 1861. What event was that? Ned Land asked. Just this. In 1861, to the northeast of Tenerife and fairly near the latitude where we are right now, the crew of the gunboat Alecto spotted a monstrous squid swimming in their waters. Commander Bauger approached the animal and attacked it with blows from harpoons and blasts from rifles, but without much success because bullets and harpoons crossed its soft flesh as if it were semi-liquid jelly. After several fruitless attempts, the crew managed to slip a noose around the mollusk's body. This noose slid as far as the caudal fins and came to a halt. Then they tried to haul the monster on board, but its weight was so considerable that when they tugged on the rope, the animal parted company with its tail, and deprived of this adornment, it disappeared beneath the waters. Finally, an actual event, Ned Land said. An indisputable event, my gallant Ned. Accordingly, people have proposed naming this devilfish Bowger's squid. And how long was it? The Canadian asked. Didn't it measure about 6 meters? Said Conseil, who was stationed at the window and examining anew the crevices in the cliff. Precisely, I replied. Wasn't its head, Conseil went on, crowned by 8 tentacles that quivered in the water like a nest of snakes? Precisely. Weren't its eyes prominently placed and considerably enlarged? Yes, Conseil. And wasn't its mouth a real parrot's beak but of fearsome size? Correct, Conseil. Well, with all due respect to Master, Conseil replied serenely, if this isn't Bowger's squid, it's at least one of his close relatives. I stared at Conseil. Ned Land rushed to the window. What an awful animal, he exclaimed. I stared in my turn and couldn't keep back a movement of revulsion. Before my eyes there quivered a horrible monster worthy of a place among the most far-fetched teratological legends. It was a squid of colossal dimensions, fully 8 meters long. It was traveling backward with tremendous speed in the same direction as the Nautilus. It gazed with enormous, staring eyes that were tinted sea green. Its 8 arms, or more accurately, feet, were rooted in its head, which has earned these animals the name cephalopod. Its arms stretched a distance twice the length of its body, and were writhing like the serpentine hair of the Furies. You could plainly see its 250 suckers, arranged over the inner sides of its tentacles and shaped like semispheric capsules. Sometimes these suckers fastened onto the lounge window by creating vacuums against it. The monster's mouth, a beak made of horn and shaped like that of a parrot, opened and closed vertically. Its tongue, also of horn substance and armed with several rows of sharp teeth, would flicker out from between these genuine shears. What a freak of nature! A bird's beak on a mollusk. Its body was spindle-shaped and swollen in the middle, a fleshy mass that must have weighed 20,000 to 25,000 kilograms. Its unstable color would change with tremendous speed as the animal grew irritated, passing successively from bluish-gray to reddish-brown. What was irritating this mollusk? No doubt the presence of the Nautilus, even more fearsome than itself, and which it couldn't grip with its mandibles or the suckers on its arms. And yet what monsters these devilfish are, what vitality our Creator has given them, what vigor in their movements, thanks to their owning a triple heart. Sheer chance had placed us in the presence of this squid, and I didn't want to lose this opportunity to meticulously study such a cephalopod specimen. I overcame the horror that its appearance inspired in me, picked up a pencil and began to sketch it. Perhaps this is the same as the Electos, Conseil said. Can't be, the Canadian replied, because this one's complete while the other one lost its tail. That doesn't necessarily follow, I said. The arms and tails of these animals grow back through regeneration, and in 7 years the tail on Bowger's squid has surely had time to sprout again. Anyhow, Ned shot back, if it isn't this fellow, maybe it's one of those. Indeed, other devilfish had appeared at the starboard window. I counted 7 of them. They provided the Nautilus with an escort, and I could hear their beaks gnashing on the sheet iron hull. We couldn't have asked for a more devoted following. I continued sketching. These monsters kept pace in our waters with such precision. They seemed to be standing still, and I could have traced their outlines in miniature on the window. But we were moving at a moderate speed. All at once the Nautilus stopped. A jolt made it tremble through its entire framework. Did we strike bottom? I asked. In any event, we're already clear, the Canadian replied, because we're afloat. The Nautilus was certainly afloat, but it was no longer in motion. The blades of its propeller weren't churning the waves. A minute passed. Followed by his chief officer, Captain Nemo entered the lounge. I hadn't seen him for a good while. He looked gloomy to me. Without speaking to us, without even seeing us perhaps, he went to the panel, stared at the devilfish, and said a few words to his chief officer. The latter went out, Soon the panels closed. The ceiling lit up. I went over to the captain. "An unusual assortment of devilfish," I told him, as carefree as a collector in front of an aquarium. "Correct, Mr. Naturalist," he answered me, "and we're going to fight them at close quarters." I gaped at the captain. I thought my hearing had gone bad. "At close quarters," I repeated. "Yes, sir. Our propeller is jammed. I think the horn-covered mandibles of one of these squid are entangled in the blades. That's why we aren't moving. And what are you going to do? Rise to the surface and slaughter the vermin? A difficult undertaking. Correct. Our electric bullets are ineffective against such soft flesh where they don't meet enough resistance to go off, but we'll attack the beasts with axes. And harpoons, sir," the Canadian said, "if you don't turn down my help." "I accept it, Mr. Land." "We'll go with you," I said, and we followed Captain Nemo, heading to the central companionway. There's some 10 men were standing by for the assault, armed with boarding axes. Conseil and I picked up 2 more axes. Ned Land seized a harpoon. By then the Nautilus had returned to the surface of the waves. Stationed on the top steps, one of the seamen undid the bolts of the hatch. But he had scarcely unscrewed the nuts when the hatch flew up with tremendous violence, obviously pulled open by the suckers on a devilfish's arm. Instantly, one of those long arms glided like a snake into the opening, and 20 others were quivering above. With a sweep of the axe, Captain Nemo chopped off this fearsome tentacle, which slid writhing down the steps. Just as we were crowding each other to reach the platform, 2 more arms lashed the air, swooped on the seaman stationed in front of Captain Nemo, and carried the fellow away with irresistible violence. Captain Nemo gave a shout and leaped outside. We rushed after him. What a scene! Seized by the tentacle and glued to its suckers, the unfortunate man was swinging in the air at the mercy of this enormous appendage. He gasped, he choked, he yelled. "Help! Help!" These words, pronounced in French, left me deeply stunned. So I had a fellow countryman on board, perhaps several. I'll hear his harrowing plea the rest of my life. The poor fellow was done for. Who could tear him from such a powerful grip? Even so, Captain Nemo rushed at the devilfish and with a sweep of the axe hewed one more of its arms. His chief officer struggled furiously with other monsters crawling up the Nautilus's sides. The crew battled with flailing axes. The Canadian, Conseil, and I sank our weapons into these fleshy masses. An intense, musky odor filled the air. It was horrible. For an instant I thought the poor man entwined by the devilfish might be torn loose from its powerful suction. 7 arms out of 8 had been chopped off. Brandishing its victim like a feather, one lone tentacle was writhing in the air. But just as Captain Nemo and his chief officer rushed at it, the animal shot off a spout of blackish liquid, secreted by a pouch located in its abdomen. It blinded us. When this cloud had dispersed, the squid was gone, and so was my poor fellow countryman. What rage then drove us against these monsters? We lost all self-control. 10 or 12 devilfish had overrun the Nautilus's platform and sides. We piled helter-skelter into the thick of these sawed-off snakes, which darted over the platform amid waves of blood and sepia ink. It seemed as if these viscous tentacles grew back like the many heads of Hydra. At every thrust, Ned Land's harpoon would plunge into a squid's sea-green eye and burst it. But my daring companion was suddenly toppled by the tentacles of a monster he could not avoid. Oh, my heart nearly exploded with excitement and horror. The squid's fearsome beak was wide open over Ned Land. The poor man was about to be cut in half. I ran to his rescue, but Captain Nemo got there first. His axe disappeared between the 2 enormous mandibles, and the Canadian, miraculously saved, stood and plunged his harpoon all the way into the devilfish's triple heart. "Tit for tat," Captain Nemo told the Canadian. "I owed it to myself." Ned bowed without answering him. This struggle had lasted a quarter of an hour. Defeated, mutilated, battered to death, the monsters finally yielded to us and disappeared beneath the waves. Red with blood, motionless by the beacon, Captain Nemo stared at the sea that had swallowed one of his companions, and large tears streamed from his eyes. Chapter 43. The Gulf Stream. This dreadful scene on April 20 none of us will ever be able to forget. I wrote it up in a state of intense excitement. Later, I reviewed my narrative. I read it to Conseil and the Canadian. They found it accurate in detail but deficient in impact. To convey such sights, it would take the pen of our most famous poet, Victor Hugo, author of The Toilers of the Sea. As I said, Captain Nemo wept while staring at the waves. His grief was immense. This was the second companion he had lost since we had come aboard. And what a way to die! Smashed, strangled, crushed by the fearsome arms of a devilfish, ground between its iron mandibles. This friend would never rest with his companions in the placid waters of their coral cemetery. As for me, what had harrowed my heart in the thick of this struggle was the despairing yell given by this unfortunate man. Forgetting his regulation language, this poor Frenchman had reverted to speaking his own mother tongue to fling out one supreme plea. Among the Nautilus's crew, allied body and soul with Captain Nemo and likewise fleeing from human contact, I had found a fellow countryman. Was he the only representative of France in this mysterious alliance, obviously made up of individuals from different nationalities? This was just one more of those insoluble problems that kept welling up in my mind. Captain Nemo re-entered his stateroom, and I saw no more of him for a good while. But how sad, despairing, and irresolute he must have felt, to judge from this ship whose soul he was, which reflected his every mood. The Nautilus no longer kept to a fixed heading. It drifted back and forth, riding with the waves like a corpse. Its propeller had been disentangled but was barely put to use. It was navigating at random. It couldn't tear itself away from the setting of this last struggle, from this sea that had devoured one of its own. 10 days went by in this way. It was only on May 1 that the Nautilus openly resumed its northbound course, after raising the Bahamas at the mouth of Old Bahama Channel. We then went with the current of the sea's greatest river, which has its own banks, fish, and temperature. I mean the Gulf Stream. It is indeed a river that runs independently through the middle of the Atlantic, its waters never mixing with the ocean's waters. It's a salty river, saltier than the sea surrounding it. Its average depth is 3,000 feet, its average width 60 miles. In certain localities, its current moves at a speed of 4 kilometers per hour. The unchanging volume of its waters is greater than that of all the world's rivers combined. As discovered by Commander Maury, the true source of the Gulf Stream, its starting point, if you prefer, is located in the Bay of Biscay. There its waters, still weak in temperature and color, begin to form. It goes down south, skirts equatorial Africa, warms its waves in the rays of the torrid zone, crosses the Atlantic, reaches Cape São Roque on the coast of Brazil, and forks into 2 branches, one going to the Caribbean Sea for further saturation with heat particles. Then, entrusted with restoring the balance between hot and cold temperatures, and with mixing tropical and northern waters, the Gulf Stream begins to play its stabilizing role. Attaining a white heat in the Gulf of Mexico, it heads north up the American coast, advances as far as Newfoundland, swerves away under the thrust of a cold current from the Davis Strait, and resumes its ocean course by going along a great circle of the Earth on a rum line. It then divides into 2 arms near the 43rd parallel. One, helped by the northeast trade winds, returns to the Bay of Biscay and the Azores. The other washes the shores of Ireland and Norway with lukewarm water, goes beyond Spitzbergen, where its temperature falls to 4 degrees centigrade, and fashions the open sea at the pole. It was on this oceanic river that the Nautilus was then navigating. Leaving Old Bahama Channel, which is 14 leagues wide by 350 meters deep, the Gulf Stream moves at the rate of 8 kilometers per hour. Its speed steadily decreases as it advances northward, and we must pray that this steadiness continues, because, as experts agree, if its speed and direction were to change, the climates of Europe would undergo disturbances whose consequences are incalculable. Near noon I was on the platform with Conseil. I shared with him the relevant details on the Gulf Stream. When my explanation was over, I invited him to dip his hands into its current. Conseil did so, and he was quite astonished to experience no sensation of either hot or cold. "That comes," I told him, "from the water temperature of the Gulf Stream, which, as it leaves the Gulf of Mexico, is barely different from your blood temperature. This Gulf Stream is a huge heat generator that enables the coasts of Europe to be decked in eternal greenery. And if Commander Maury is correct, were one to harness the full warmth of this current, it would supply enough heat to keep molten a river of iron solder as big as the Amazon or the Missouri." Just then the Gulf Stream's speed was 2.25 meters per second. So distinct is its current from the surrounding sea, its confined waters stand out against the ocean and operate on a different level from the colder waters. Murky as well, and very rich in saline material, their pure indigo contrasts with the green waves surrounding them. Moreover, their line of demarcation is so clear that abreast of the Carolinas, the Nautilus's spur cut the waves of the Gulf Stream while its propeller was still churning those belonging to the ocean. This current swept along with it a whole host of moving creatures. Argonauts, so common in the Mediterranean, voyaged here in schools of large numbers. Among cartilaginous fish, the most remarkable were rays whose ultra-slender tails made up nearly a third of the body, which was shaped like a huge diamond 25 feet long. Then little 1-meter sharks, the head large, the snout short and rounded, the teeth sharp and arranged in several rows, the body seemingly covered with scales. Among bony fish, I noted grizzled wrasse unique to these seas, deepwater gilthead whose iris has a fiery gleam, 1-meter croakers whose large mouths bristle with small teeth, and which let out thin cries, black rudderfish like those I've already discussed, blue dorados accented with gold and silver, rainbow-hued parrotfish that can rival the loveliest tropical birds in coloring, banded blennies with triangular heads, bluish flounder without scales, toadfish covered with a crosswise yellow band in the shape of a Greek T, swarms of little freckled gobies stippled with brown spots, lungfish with silver heads and yellow tails, various specimens of salmon, mullet with slim figures, and a softly glowing radiance that Lassapede dedicated to the memory of his wife, and finally the American cavella, a handsome fish decorated by every honorary order, bedizened with their every ribbon, frequenting the shores of this great nation where ribbons and orders are held in such low esteem. I might add that during the night, the Gulf Stream's phosphorescent waters rivaled the electric glow of our beacon, especially in the stormy weather that frequently threatened us. On May 8, while abreast of North Carolina, we were across from Cape Hatteras once more. There the Gulf Stream is 75 miles wide and 210 meters deep. The Nautilus continued to wander at random. Seemingly, all supervision had been jettisoned. Under these conditions, I admit that we could easily have gotten away. In fact, the populous shores offered ready refuge everywhere. The sea was plowed continuously by the many steamers providing service between the Gulf of Mexico and New York or Boston, and it was crossed night and day by little schooners engaged in coastal trade over various points on the American shore. We could hope to be picked up, so it was a promising opportunity, despite the 30 miles that separated the Nautilus from these Union coasts. But one distressing circumstance totally thwarted the Canadians' plans. The weather was thoroughly foul. We were approaching waterways where storms are commonplace, the very homeland of tornadoes and cyclones specifically engendered by the Gulf Stream's current. To face a frequently raging sea in a frail skiff was a race to certain disaster. Ned Land conceded this himself. So he champed at the bit in the grip of an intense homesickness that could be cured only by our escape. "Sir," he told me that day, "it's got to stop. I want to get to the bottom of this. Your Nemo's veering away from shore and heading up north, but believe you me, I had my fill at the South Pole and I'm not going with him to the North Pole. What can we do, Ned, since it isn't feasible to escape right now? I keep coming back to my idea. We've got to talk to the captain. When we were in your own country's seas, you didn't say a word. Now that we're in mine, I intend to speak up. Before a few days are out, I figure the Nautilus will lie abreast of Nova Scotia, and from there to Newfoundland is the mouth of a large gulf, and the St. Lawrence empties into that gulf, and the St. Lawrence is my own river, the river running by Quebec, my hometown, and when I think about all this, my gorge rises and my hair stands on end. Honestly, sir, I'd rather jump overboard. I can't stay here any longer. I'm suffocating." The Canadian was obviously at the end of his patience. His vigorous nature couldn't adapt to this protracted imprisonment. His facial appearance was changing by the day. His moods grew gloomier and gloomier. I had a sense of what he was suffering because I also was gripped by homesickness. Nearly 7 months had gone by without our having any news from shore. Moreover, Captain Nemo's reclusiveness, his changed disposition, and especially his total silence since the battle with the devilfish all made me see things in a different light. I no longer felt the enthusiasm of our first days on board. You needed to be Flemish like Conseil to accept these circumstances, living in a habitat designed for cetaceans and other denizens of the deep. Truly, if that gallant lad had owned gills instead of lungs, I think he would have made an outstanding fish. "Well, sir," Ned Land went on, seeing that I hadn't replied. "Well, Ned, you want me to ask Captain Nemo what he intends to do with us?" "Yes, sir. Even though he has already made that clear. Yes, I want it settled once and for all. Speak just for me, strictly on my behalf if you want. But I rarely encounter him. He positively avoids me. All the more reason you should go look him up. I'll confer with him, Ned." "When?" the Canadian asked insistently. "When I encounter him. Professor Aronnax, would you like me to go find him myself?" "No, let me do it. Tomorrow, today," Ned Land said. "So be it." "I'll see him today," I answered the Canadian, who, if he took action himself, would certainly have ruined everything. I was left to myself. His request granted, I decided to dispose of it immediately. I like things over and done with. I re-entered my stateroom. From there I could hear movements inside Captain Nemo's quarters. I couldn't pass up this chance for an encounter. I knocked on his door. I received no reply. I knocked again, then tried the knob. The door opened. I entered. The captain was there. He was bending over his work table and hadn't heard me. Determined not to leave without questioning him, I drew closer. He looked up sharply with a frowning brow and said in a pretty stern tone, "Oh, it's you. What do you want?" "To speak with you, Captain." "But I'm busy, sir. I'm at work. I give you the freedom to enjoy your privacy. Can't I have the same for myself?" This reception was less than encouraging. But I was determined to give as good as I got. "Sir," I said coolly, "I need to speak with you on a matter that simply can't wait." "Whatever could that be, sir?" he replied sarcastically. "Have you made some discovery that has escaped me? Has the sea yielded up some novel secret to you?" We were miles apart. But before I could reply, he showed me a manuscript open on the table and told me in a more serious tone, "Here, Professor Aronnax, is a manuscript written in several languages. It contains a summary of my research under the sea, and God willing, it won't perish with me. Signed with my name, complete with my life story, this manuscript will be enclosed in a small, unsinkable contrivance. The last surviving man on the Nautilus will throw this contrivance into the sea, and it will go wherever the waves carry it. The man's name, his life story written by himself, so the secret of his existence might someday be unveiled. But just then I saw this announcement only as a lead-in to my topic. "Captain," I replied, "I'm all praise for this idea you're putting into effect. The fruits of your research must not be lost, but the methods you're using strike me as primitive. Who knows where the winds will take that contrivance, into whose hands it may fall? Can't you find something better? Can't you or one of your men—" "Never, sir," the captain said, swiftly interrupting me. "But my companions and I would be willing to safeguard this manuscript, and if you give us back our freedom, your freedom." Captain Nemo put in, standing up. "Yes, sir, and that's the subject on which I wanted to confer with you. For 7 months we've been aboard your vessel, and I ask you today, in the name of my companions as well as myself, if you intend to keep us here forever." "Professor Aronnax," Captain Nemo said, "I'll answer you today just as I did 7 months ago. Whoever boards the Nautilus must never leave it. What you're inflicting on us is outright slavery. Call it anything you like. But every slave has the right to recover his freedom by any worthwhile available means." "Who has denied you that right?" Captain Nemo replied. "Did I ever try to bind you with your word of honor? The captain stared at me, crossing his arms. "Sir," I told him, "to take up this subject a second time would be distasteful to both of us, so let's finish what we've started. I repeat, it isn't just for myself that I raise this issue. To me, research is a relief, a potent diversion, an enticement, a passion that can make me forget everything else. Like you, I'm a man neglected and unknown, living in the faint hope that someday I can pass on to future generations the fruits of my labors, figuratively speaking, by means of some contrivance left to the luck of winds and waves. In short, I can admire you and comfortably go with you while playing a role I only partly understand. But I still catch glimpses of other aspects of your life that are surrounded by involvements and secrets that, alone on board, my companions and I can't share. And even when our hearts could beat with yours, moved by some of your griefs or stirred by your deeds of courage and genius, we've had to stifle even the slightest token of that sympathy that arises at the sight of something fine and good, whether it comes from friend or enemy. All right then. It's this feeling of being alien to your deepest concerns that makes our situation unacceptable, impossible, even impossible for me, but especially for Ned Land. Every man, by virtue of his very humanity, deserves fair treatment. Have you considered how a love of freedom and hatred of slavery could lead to plans of vengeance in a temperament like the Canadians, what he might think, attempt, endeavor? I fell silent. Captain Nemo stood up. Ned Land can think, attempt, or endeavor anything he wants. What difference is it to me? I didn't go looking for him. I don't keep him on board for my pleasure. As for you, Professor Aronnax, you're a man able to understand anything, even silence. I have nothing more to say to you. Let this first time you've come to discuss this subject also be the last, because a second time I won't even listen. I withdrew. From that day forward, our position was very strained. I reported this conversation to my two companions. "Now we know," Ned said, "that we can't expect a thing from this man. The Nautilus is nearing Long Island. We'll escape, no matter what the weather." But the skies became more and more threatening. There were conspicuous signs of a hurricane on the way. The atmosphere was turning white and milky. Slender sheaves of cirrus clouds were followed on the horizon by layers of nimbicumulus. Other low clouds fled swiftly. The sea grew towering, inflated by long swells. Every bird had disappeared except a few petrels, friends of the storms. The barometer fell significantly, indicating a tremendous tension in the surrounding haze. The mixture in our storm glass decomposed under the influence of the electricity charging the air. A struggle of the elements was approaching. The storm burst during the daytime of May 13, just as the Nautilus was cruising abreast of Long Island, a few miles from the Narrows to Upper New York Bay. I'm able to describe this struggle of the elements because Captain Nemo didn't flee into the ocean depths. Instead, from some inexplicable whim, he decided to brave it out on the surface. The wind was blowing from the southwest, initially a stiff breeze, in other words, with a speed of 15 meters per second, which built to 25 meters near 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is the figure for major storms. Unshaken by these squalls, Captain Nemo stationed himself on the platform. He was lashed around the waist to withstand the monstrous breakers foaming over the deck. I hoisted and attached myself to the same place, dividing my wonderment between the storm and this incomparable man who faced it head-on. The raging sea was swept with huge tattered clouds drenched by the waves. I saw no more of the small intervening billows that form in the troughs of the big crests, just long, soot-colored undulations with crests so compact they didn't foam. They kept growing taller. They were spurring each other on. The Nautilus, sometimes lying on its side, sometimes standing on end like a mast, rolled and pitched frightfully. Near 5 o'clock a torrential rain fell, but it lulled neither wind nor sea. The hurricane was unleashed at a speed of 45 meters per second, hence almost 40 leagues per hour. Under these conditions, houses topple, roof tiles puncture doors, iron railings snap in two, and 24-pounder cannons relocate. And yet in the midst of this turmoil, the Nautilus lived up to that saying of an expert engineer: "A well-constructed hull can defy any sea." This submersible was no resisting rock that waves could demolish. It was a steel spindle, obediently in motion, without rigging or masting, and able to brave their fury with impunity. Meanwhile, I was carefully examining these unleashed breakers. They measured up to 15 meters in height over a length of 150 to 175 meters, and the speed of their propagation, half that of the wind, was 15 meters per second. Their volume and power increased with the depth of the waters. I then understood the role played by these waves, which trap air in their flanks and release it in the depths of the sea where its oxygen brings life. Their utmost pressure, it has been calculated, can build to 3,000 kilograms on every square foot of surface they strike. It was such waves in the Hebrides that repositioned a stone block weighing 84,000 pounds. It was their relatives in the tidal wave on December 23, 1854, that toppled part of the Japanese city of Tokyo, then went that same day at 700 kilometers per hour to break on the beaches of America. After nightfall, the storm grew in intensity. As in the 1860 cyclone on Reunion Island, the barometer fell to 710 millimeters. At the close of day, I saw a big ship passing on the horizon, struggling painfully. It lay to at half steam in an effort to hold steady on the waves. It must have been a steamer on one of those lines out of New York to Liverpool or Le Havre. It soon vanished into the shadows. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the skies caught on fire. The air was streaked with violent flashes of lightning. I couldn't stand this brightness, but Captain Nemo stared straight at it, as if to inhale the spirit of the storm. A dreadful noise filled the air, a complicated noise made up of the roar of crashing breakers, the howl of the wind, claps of thunder. The wind shifted to every point of the horizon, and the cyclone left the east to return there after passing through north, west, and south, moving in the opposite direction of revolving storms in the southern hemisphere. Oh, that Gulf Stream! It truly lives up to its nickname, the Lord of Storms. All by itself, it creates these fearsome cyclones through the difference in temperature between its currents and the superimposed layers of air. The rain was followed by a downpour of fire. Droplets of water changed into exploding tufts. You would have thought Captain Nemo was courting a death worthy of himself, seeking to be struck by lightning. In one hideous pitching movement, the Nautilus reared its steel spur into the air like a lightning rod, and I saw long sparks shoot down it. Shattered at the end of my strength, I slid flat on my belly to the hatch. I opened it and went below to the lounge. By then the storm had reached its maximum intensity. It was impossible to stand upright inside the Nautilus. Captain Nemo re-entered near midnight. I could hear the ballast tanks filling little by little, and the Nautilus sank gently beneath the surface of the waves. Through the lounge's open windows, I saw large, frightened fish passing like phantoms in the fiery waters. Some were struck by lightning right before my eyes. The Nautilus kept descending. I thought it would find calm again at 15 meters down. No. The upper strata were too violently agitated. It needed to sink to 50 meters, searching for a resting place in the bowels of the sea. But once there, what tranquility we found, what silence, what peace all around us. Who would have known that a dreadful hurricane was then unleashed on the surface of this ocean?
Thank you for watching the entire video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. See ya!